First, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is a great turnout. My name is Matt Geyer. I'm with Greater Lafayette Indivisible. I'm the treasurer and the tech lead. That's why I've been running around. And just a little information about the format tonight. We tried to get as many topics covered as we could. We want to get through a lot of them quickly. So there's going to be 2 minutes for each response. And then if there's a follow-up, 30 seconds to respond to that. You'll have cards in front of you to tell you when time's up and not. And to start out, I think you guys have opening statements.
Okay.
So
how long is your opening statement?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
So let's go. Let's just do Tobi.
All right. Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the Greater Lafayette Indivisible team. They've been a marvelous job here. Happy to be here. My name is Tobi Beck. I'm running for U.S. Congress here in the Indiana 4th, and I am a combat veteran. I'm a foster parent. I'm a security professional and a technology expert. One of the things that I want to see, the very first thing I would want to see in Congress and fight hard for, is to remove corporate money from our election process. Right now, our representatives do not represent us. They represent large money that's piled into an election. That's the first thing we have to adamantly work to change. But while we're doing that, we need to work at providing a universal health care. Now, there are many ways to go about it, but health care is a human right. And it's one of those things that we as people should be able to have across this country. I would like a fair tax plan that has everybody paying their fair share of taxes. I would like to support our veterans so that they have, at one point in their lives, signed a blank check to this country for up to and including their lives. They've done us a service. I think we can take care of them. And also, I would like to grow our economy. And we do that not from the top down. We know that trickle-down economics doesn't work. Any child knows that trickle-down economics doesn't work because you can give all the candy to the biggest kid at Halloween and see how well it gets distributed to the other kids. We know it doesn't work. What I'd like to see is building the middle class through a strong middle class to build our entire economy. Those 5 platform pieces will start putting us on the right track to representing America rather than corporations in our government. Thank you.
Joe?
Thank you all. I'd like to thank the West Lafayette Progressives and Greater Lafayette Indivisible for the service of putting this together. I am Joe Mackey. I am a lifelong Hoosier, born and raised in Lafayette. I'm a retired machinist from Caterpillar here in Lafayette. I am a pediatric cancer activist. And I understand fully that health care is a basic human right. And I see us fail every day across the 4th Congressional District, around the state of Indiana, along the entirety of this nation. We must have health care. We must have affordable education. Without health care, without access to quality education, we will never grow the middle class. It will not matter how much money is spent in politics if we do not achieve our goals to provide a quality education for our children and health care for all. We must protect our seniors. We have seen a $1.5 trillion deficit busting bill passed that now threatens our nation's seniors. And I'm here tonight to tell you that until the day our seniors rest comfortably at night in the beds in the long-term care facilities they now call home, Donald Trump should not get a tax cut. Until the day that working Hoosier families can afford to send their children to Indiana colleges and universities without fear of bankrupting themselves or their children's future, Donald Trump shouldn't get a tax cut. Until the day that we decide for ourselves that a radicalized right-wing Congress can no longer treat the American people like Oliver Twist with his porridge bowl in hand, asking, please, sir, may I have some health care? Please, sir, may my children be educated? Please, sir, may our seniors be cared for? We have much work to do. Begins with the fundamental premise, what kind of nation do you wish to live in?
Thank you both. We'll just go right into healthcare because we're talking about it. So since Tobi started, I'll start with Joe on this one. Joe, do you support the Affordable Care Act, and what improvements would you suggest to it?
I typically am critical of the ACA in that it did not go far enough. We must have single payer. It is time to remove insurance companies from the healthcare formula altogether. We must negotiate pharmaceutical pricing. The American people can do this. We are the only advanced nation on earth that does not. We must do this. We must save our critical access hospitals in our rural communities. Today, 670 are at risk of closing. They're closing today 8 times faster than they were before 2008 in the ACA. We have a healthcare crisis in this country. We are in free fall. We are in trouble, and we must vote. Thank you.
The ACA is a Band-Aid on an amputation. It serves for a moment, but it's not enough. There are other alternatives. Today, every military person on active duty and every military retiree is privy to something called TRICARE. It is a health care system where you show the TRICARE card and you're covered. There's no worry about pre-existing conditions or bills that show up 3 months later for the physician's third assistant. There's no question or authorization process for a particular treatment or diagnosis process. You're just covered. Costs about 4.5% of income. That is a working model currently used by over 1% of this nation currently, and it's used for everything from cradle to grave, all age groups, families included. So if that's a working system, our soldiers have blazed a path for us and shown us a way that we can have a healthcare system. This is not the VA. It is called TRICARE. It is a working system. Now, if we can do it with that group of military, perhaps we can extend that for everybody. But its key factor is something that was in existence before 1976, which is there is no profit, no additional profit to be made in healthcare. That's where our extended costs are coming from. It is administered by a private industry, but that industry makes no profit. There's your solution in the long term. Your short term is to fix the ACA. Your long term is ultimately to give a universal care for everyone at a legitimate cost, which pays everybody, and it costs about 4.5% of income. Thank you.
All right, as a follow-up, you'll have 30 seconds apiece for this. Do you support H.R. 676, also known as Medicare for All? So, Joe.
There are some challenges to H.R. 676. One of them is it takes 4 years to implement, and it will not save the rural community hospitals. They will close. What good would it do the Democrats in the state of Indiana to support this bill, to get this passed, come home and find that here in the 4th Congressional District, 5 rural hospitals have closed? The Republicans will blame us. They will burn down our Democratic House, and they will dance on the ashes for the next 30 years. We must send someone to Congress prepared to discuss the issues facing the rural communities. The 4th Congressional, in large, is a rural district. We cannot ignore this problem. It is significant.
Joe, I'm going to have to stop you. I'll give you 10 seconds on top of that. Do you support H.R. 676, Medicare for All?
676 is one of the steps along the path to gaining universal care. 676, again, is not the solution. Where the ACA may have been the Band-Aid on the amputation, 676 is probably a tourniquet, along the progressive care for that. We will ultimately get to the point, but this is a middle step in getting us there. So yes, I would support making progress along that path because we did not get into this problem overnight. We're not going to flip a switch and get out overnight. It has to be, realistically, it is a path to get us there.
Thank you. And this will be a 2-minute question. If you do not support H.R. 676, or if you do, what do you propose instead? 2 minutes each.
Well, initially, there is a bill in Congress right now, H.R. 2957, called the Save Our Rural Hospitals Act. It will save the community critical access hospitals. That one is submitted by a Republican. It has bipartisan support. It is dying in committee. That bill can be moved forward on day one. It is a simple majority budget vote. We can do that. We can put a floor under the free fall in rural health care. We can address those issues in the Sanders plan that fall short of not only the needs of the 4th, but across the country as well in our flyover states. So we must have a voice. The flyover states must have a voice in formulating a plan that is suitable for all of us and not just some of us.
So, question is, what would I propose instead of 676? I recognize that 676 is a stepping stone along the path. What I would propose ultimately is that we get to a place where every American is secure in their health care. Right now, Americans spend approximately 1/3 of their average income on health care. This is outrageous, when it can be as little as 4.5% to 5%. I would much rather pay the 4.5% than 30%. So this is ultimately goal, like every other first world nation, to be able to provide health care for every citizen. Recognizing that your first step is going to be to shore up the ACA, that can be done immediately. To put in the rural hospitals, that is not prevented from being done either, as well as to support the 676 as a step along this process, and ultimately to gain a health care for all.
Thank you both. We'll start with Tobi this time. What is your position on a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour?
Federal minimum wage, when federal minimum wage was originally put in, there was great hue and cry, and every argument against the federal minimum wage is being heard today when we talk about raising the federal minimum wage. In the mid-'80s, we separated our production from our average workers' wages, and that went along with the weakening of our unions and collective bargaining power, and it stagnated our middle class. The minimum wage is a basic living wage to keep people out of poverty. The design behind it was to offer a basic floor so that a person working 40 hours a week could support a family. I am all in favor of reinstituting that model and tying it to our poverty level. Keep our minimum wage tied to the poverty level. If we recognize the poverty level today is $23,000 a year, the minimum wage should be able to keep a person above that so that we can keep and maintain a family structure that allows an earner to support a family above the poverty level. Thank you.
When I was a younger man, the largest employer in the United States was General Motors, and today it's Walmart. So we have a problem. We have a problem in that we flourish in jobs that were not meant to pay well. We flourish in jobs that were transitional in nature. My mother worked for Kmart many years as a cashier. Congress passed a bill and created the CETA program, which allowed my mother to go to school, to earn a business background, to go to work for National Homes. It moved her from poverty into home ownership. And while I certainly support the idea that people who go to work every day should be paid well, I also support the idea that this nation should be producing jobs that pay well and not lock people into these transitional jobs we see today. So we have some work to do. We need to grow the job opportunity market that will come initially through infrastructure development. We can incentivize businesses to reinvest in their people. Eisenhower did this. He drove them to investment. Those investments created the middle class. They created the retirement plans, the 401ks, the health care benefits, those were all based on his tax plan. We must look at that today and ask ourselves where we went wrong.
All right, Joe, we'll start with you on this next one. 2 minutes. What is the role of federal government in protecting workers' rights, and what roles do unions have?
The federal government absolutely must be involved in the protection of its people, whether it's in the workforce or out in the community. Must absolutely be involved. I will give you an example. When I went into the machining business as a younger man, lost fingers was the typical injury across all machining. And the finger that was typically lost was the ring finger. So today, even today, after retiring, I still wear my wedding ring around my neck. It was government that drove safety. It was government. Unions are out there today fighting to be safe in the workplace. And we see issues now. We just held a vigil here in Lafayette last week to remember those who died in the workplace. So we know this happens. The government must be there. The government must be a leading voice in mandating safety procedures, safety requirements. Businesses are ethically and morally obligated to abide by those, because at the end of the day, you want your employee to go home, not to the funeral home.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was a landmark tragedy which brought home to the nation the need for government standards when it comes to safety, when it comes to how many people were in a room, when it comes to standards associated in the workplace. The government has an obligation to prevent corporations from seeking anything at a profit, including the abuse of local workers. Unions also play a part in this, because it's through the collective bargaining power of unions that people can stand up in the workplace and demand safety, demand a fair living wage, and demand to be held equal in the profits of the corporation, to share in their profits. When the people flourish, the corporation flourishes. You can't have one without the other. There is a balance between corporate profit and individual and union power. Unfortunately, we've done a great deal to erode our unions and remove their bargaining power. This, we have to shore up the other half of the equation if we expect there to be a balance returned to us. So does the government have a piece in this? Yes, they absolutely do. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory is an example of what happens when they don't. Child labor laws were put into place to prevent the abuse of large corporations among the young. So yes, the federal government has a position in this and has an obligation to the people at large, because we are our government. This is a government of the people. We have a right to be safe. There's also the collective bargaining power of the unions. When we build those, we also have a voice.
Thank you. We're going to go into foreign policy. We'll start with Tobi this time. Would you support H.R. 669 restricting the first use of nuclear weapons? Why or why not? And that's 2 minutes.
Short answer is yes. So 669 is the prohibition against the president for having first strike nuclear capability without first going to Congress or without having a statement of war, a declaration of war first. When the Constitution was written, when the War Powers Act was recognized, you couldn't go to war at the push of a button. It would take months to mobilize. Currently, we would normally have 30 days for the president to come to Congress and say, hey, I want to deploy troops. This is what I want to do. But today, a president can use a nuclear weapon immediately. This is a limitation to prevent that from happening unless there is a declared statement of war. And it is Congress that declares war. Congress declares war because Congress is the part of the government that is made from the people. We as Americans as a whole are the ones who decide whether or not we as a nation go to war. It is not one person. The commander-in-chief is essentially the general, the top top organizer to execute the will of the people, but it's you who decide to go to war. That's why that particular bill immediately needs to be passed, to prevent a president from starting a war without our permission, without our say-so, without our Congress reaching in and saying we, as Americans, are ready to go to war.
Joe?
No one person should have the power to kill millions at the push of a button. The decision to use nuclear weapons must be collective. It must be unanimous. We must protect ourselves in the world from an individual who might be qualified, might not be, actually jumping to a conclusion and pushing a button. Congress, Tobi's right, it is the responsibility of Congress to wage war, to declare war. We must rely on that Congress to do their job. We cannot allow it to be circumvented as we have, and we have seen troops mobilized at a moment's notice and kept in the field. So yes, I would support that bill. It really is, I think, for Democrats as a whole, a no-brainer. Would you agree? Yeah, I don't think that's a problem for Democrats.
Thank you both. We'll start with Joe this time. Do you believe the statements and actions of the current administration are bringing us closer to war? If so, what role can Congress play in addressing the problem? In 2 minutes for both.
In regards to, say, Korea or Syria, is this what we're speaking, or just the
All
actions
of the
president?
Yes.
The budget that was just passed here at Christmas time cut 8 different programs that funded not only our rural hospitals, but also our only comprehensive pediatric hospital here in Indiana, Riley Hospital for Children. And everyone's worried about a mean tweet from Donald Trump. And I honestly believe that people need to turn off Twitter and pay attention to what Paul Ryan and his ilk are doing to us. Donald Trump is a pain in the backside. Paul Ryan is a clear and present danger to the American people. Turn off Twitter, turn off Facebook, and turn on to what Congress is doing, ladies and gentlemen. We have some problems that must be addressed.
Our current administration has currently weighed in on a number of hotspots throughout the world. He has weighed in on Syria, recognizing that there have been chemical attacks in Syria, and his response was ill-measured, ill-advised, and without proper consultation from the State Department, which he has refused to reconstitute. We have a huge number of vacancies in our State Department, the State Department that is designed to keep peace throughout the world. We've also raised concerns with North Korea, starting a Twitter war with, North Korea, reaching into Mexico, reaching over to China. We're now in the process of spinning up a trade war with China. There are many places where our current administration has started either economic war, trade war, and sometimes threats of physical war. Getting involved in Syria is a quagmire. For those who remember, there aren't many in this audience who will remember the beginnings of Vietnam. It was going into a foreign nation where you weren't asked to join. And because it was backed by a much stronger foe, which is also what's going on in Syria, you either have to be prepared to go all the way or pull out prematurely and have egg on your face forever. That is what we're facing through a wide variety, and I do not believe the actions of the administration are well advised enough or thought through enough or considered in enough detail. We need to reconstitute the State Department. The question is, what can we as Congress do? Pressure that the Secretary of State rebuild our State Department, insist that the ambassadors' positions be filled with qualified individuals, and work hard to create an atmosphere that works with the rest of the world instead of against it.
Thank you. We're going to stay in foreign policy, and you guys are going to have 2 minutes to answer each of these. You both touched on these, but these are more specific. And we'll start with Tobi this time.
Okay.
Do you think North Korea poses a threat to our national security? If so, what should be done about it?
Does North Korea pose a threat to our national security? When they launched a nuclear test that could reach every part of the United States, it became a threat. Now, there is the possibility that their nuclear program has been fatally crippled by collapsing a mountain on top of their testing facility. They failed to do science well. However, it still remains a threat. The technology is there. Once you've got the knowledge, it doesn't immediately disappear. Do they remain a threat? As long as they are an authoritarian regime, yes. They are a threat to us. Is it the imminent threat that it might have been 6 months ago? Maybe not.
Thank you. Joe?
North Korea's behavior towards the United States has been extremely aggressive in the entirety of my lifetime. They were a threat before they had a nuclear bomb. They're hacking, they're placing viruses in our internet. They are aggressive. They are a problem. They must be dealt with. I do hope that we can denuclearize North Korea. And in this effort, I do support our president. I think it is important for us as a nation to be united in achieving the goal, even if we find the person getting the credit is not to our liking. We are the United States of America, and as President Obama once quite clearly stated, we don't build world peace simply by talking to our friends. So, yeah, North Korea is a problem, but we're addressing it.
Thank you. Wrapping up foreign policy, we'll start with Joe this time. Do you support U.S. military intervention in Syria? Why or why not?
I do not support any military action that cannot be defined in terms of clear objectives and time frames. There is no clear replacement for Bashir Assad and his regime. We have seen what happens when we depose a regime and there is no organic government present to take over. Libya is a classic example. Iraq is an example. We don't need another one. We must monitor the situation. I would like to see the UN, some foreign body, create a no-fly zone and protective zones to allow the non-combatants at least an opportunity to get out of the fight. But direct intervention, boots on the ground, absolutely not.
This is one of those heartbreaking moments where you want to reach out to Syria and you want to do something. But unless we are invited in by the administration of Syria, invading their nation is against the law. It is unfortunate, but that's the way it is. If we involved ourselves in Syria, we would have to be prepared to go to war with everyone who backs Syria. In this case, that's Russia. And we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared to go to war to the full extent of war with Russia? The answer to that is without being requested to come in by the Syrian administration. We can't, because that's the law. And it's heartbreaking, but it's the truth. The only safety valve for that is the United Nations. If the United Nations turns around and says, there are war atrocities, this must stop, then we have a duty and an obligation to step up with the United Nations and put an end to it. But that becomes a world effort, not a United States effort.
Thank you. We're going to move on to immigration, and we'll start with Tobi on this one. What legislation would you propose or support to protect immigrant rights, including DACA and a path to citizenship?
So I love the question about DACA because it seems like a no-brainer. To me, it seems like an absolute no-brainer. Of course we would support the DACA recipients. Our DACA recipients are people who have grown up here. Being undocumented is not a crime. Crossing the border without permission is the crime, but they didn't do that as an adult. And as a child, they never understood a border. They didn't, as a 7-year-old, didn't consciously commit a crime. So those DACA recipients are truly the most worthy people recognized being able to go to citizenship. They've grown up here, they are conviction-free, they're hardworking individuals. How do we get there? We take our quota for immigrants, and I think our quota is something on the order of, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, it might be 500,000 a year. Take that quota, add 100,000 a year to it, and take that 100,000 and apply it to the DACA recipients. Within a few years, you will clean up all of the DACA recipients that are listed, and we no longer have the DACA problem. They have their path to citizenship. Why we have a problem right now is that in order to apply for citizenship, you have to be in your home country. They have no home country. So they're caught in a legal limbo. And because our laws have this ridiculous legal limbo loophole, we can't get them citizenship. So of course, it's a no-brainer. Fix the loophole that prevents them from being citizens and welcome them into this country as American citizens that they want to be and have been working towards.
My family immigrated here in 1956, prior to my birth, mind you. 5 of my 7 brothers and sisters arrived with my parents after the Second World War. My 2 older brothers, Christopher and Kevin, are British citizens who volunteered and served in Vietnam. They took their oath of loyalty, and they fulfilled that oath when they raised their weapon. A few weeks ago, I got a call from my brother. He said, I think I've got a big problem here. I said, what is it? He said, I was thinking about going down to become a citizen, and I had to tear the house apart to find my green card, and it expired 2 years ago. And he's 65 years old. He's been here since he was 7. We need a pathway to citizenship. I support E-Verify. I don't want to put quotas in play when we can use E-Verify, when we can document the undocumented across the country, in the workplace, in the schools, in the churches. We can do this. We can document them. I will say this, during the Great Potato Famine, millions of individuals left Ireland and they came here with no documentation. And we met them at the shore and we documented them prior to entry. And I am very uncomfortable with the idea that we are criminalizing a race of people. So I want a pathway to citizenship. I believe in E-Verify. Donald Trump has said he supports E-Verify. We could get that done right away. This new Congress in 2019, we can get that done, and we can end this. The alternative is to build $100 million prisons up near Hobart and spend millions of our taxpayer dollars housing the undocumented, medicating them, feeding them, educating them, and then deporting them. I think it's feasible. I think it's economically feasible. We should be using E-Verify. We should document these souls.
Thank you. We'll start with Joe on this next one. Should the U.S. increase the number of refugees it accepts? Why or why not?
My son's getting married, which is a big deal when you've lost his 2 younger siblings. His future wife, Nazanin Soleimani, is Iranian, and she and her parents fled Iran when Ahmadinejad came to power. He ran on a platform of, if you are not Muslim, you must be mentally unstable and therefore should be institutionalized. And his plan was to arrest non-Muslims, institutionalize them, sell off their worldly possessions to pay for it. This is what they were up against. They fled literally with the clothes on their back. So when I talk about opening our doors, I understand the way the world works. When a child from Uruguay is motivated to walk to the United States, the door must be open for that child. Something is going on. Children don't just pick up and walk across the better part of a continent. We can find homes for everyone. We are an open border nation for a reason. people come here because we are free. Ronald Reagan said this, and he was absolutely right. Anyone can come to the United States and be an American, but not everyone can move to China and become Chinese. They cannot move to France and become French. This is what it means to be an American. We are a melting pot. We are open. We are free. We must remain so.
Do we increase refugees in the United States? Yes. If you're the richest nation in the world and you have the resources to help people save their lives, we need to do so. When I was in the Army, we had the Haitian refugee crisis, where literally people would get on things that you would charitably call a boat. You know, literally fishing boats that would normally hold you and your family for a fishing trip would put 20 people on it because they knew they had to get out of Haiti because of prosecution. We welcomed them. Wherever possible, we brought them into the United States and integrated them. They have become tax-paying Americans in many cases. We are a nation of immigrants. Should we increase our refugees? Yes. Believe it or not, in most instances in the world where people are fleeing for their lives, at some point in the chain of events that brought people to that horrible decision, the U.S. also made a decision somewhere in that chain of events that helped create the situation. Do we have an obligation to the world? Yes. Are we the richest nation in the world and can help with this? Yes. It is the only charitable thing that we can do. So, when we talk about bringing in refugees, we're talking about a fraction of our population. 0.5% in some cases. So why can't we absorb those people, welcome them, and allow them to become Americans as well? Thank you.
Thank you both. We're going to go into criminal justice reform, and we'll start with Tobi on this one. Studies have shown that black men and women are disproportionately imprisoned in the United States and are disproportionately subjected to law enforcement activities. How can Congress act to remove implicit racial bias in policing and the justice system and remedy its effects?
Hold on, got it.
It's a long one.
It's a long one. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack in that particular question. So under criminal justice reform, first thing I would like to see us remove for-profit prisons. In any place in this nation in where you have your civil liberties or rights or life on one side of the equation, nobody should be making a profit on the other side of the equation. Ever since we put for-profit prisons in place, we have blossomed in incarcerations. Easy targets happen to be black males. So it's safe to say where we can easily turn around and say Black Lives Matter. I do not have to say only Black Lives Matter. It's both. I can recognize and support my police officers and still recognize that there is an implicit bias in this nation and that we have a racial prejudice issue going on. So can police officers understand better? Yes. Here in Lafayette and West Lafayette, we have police officers who are working very diligently to teach their communities about implicit bias. That's something that we can actually foster. What Congress can do is stop the for-prison profit process, which will also put a huge dent in the why we are incarcerating at mass rates.
Joe?
Tobi's right. For-profit prisons should be relegated to the history books. At the same time, I was just reading today where 1 in every 31 people are involved directly with the corrections system. This is a phenomenal amount in the freest and fairest nation on earth. We must rewrite a number of laws. It is time to stop treating drug addiction as a crime and start treating it as a health care issue. It is time to legalize marijuana and forego the thousands of Americans who are today locked up. We can do this. We understand that racial bias is inherent in this system. It's also inherent in the healthcare system. The same demographic groups are negatively impacted. So we have a very real racial bias written into a number of the systems that our country has developed. Being conscious of that matters when your legislator sits down with his fellow legislators, with those across the aisle, to engage in discussions regarding any kind of reform. And I would hope that that particular legislator had an open mind and had a history of engaging with those groups who are most disenfranchised in our justice system, in our prison systems, in our education systems, in our healthcare systems. We can do better. We do better when we all benefit. I would hope, anyway, that that would be the driver of legislation.
Thanks. We're going to go into reproductive health. I'm going to start with Joe. Do you support a woman's right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, and what restrictions on this right do you support or not support?
I clearly support a woman's right to determine for herself the best path to health care. It is a constitutional right. It is a sacred right. Women are born to this. They don't need the permission of their men or the government to make this determination. I would prefer no prohibitions on abortion. I would prefer that a woman be given the opportunity to determine for herself at what point and for what reasons an abortion would become necessary. I will tell you this, I am a practicing Roman Catholic, and while I would never counsel abortion as a choice, I would never in any way stand in the way of a woman's health care decisions.
I think our government is notoriously awful at making medical choices. We've shown it a number of ways, and I don't think the government needs to be in your doctor's office making those choices. There is no reasonable way to cover every single instance in every single case. It is a decision for her, her doctor, and if necessary, her God and spiritual advisor. It is not ours. It is a difficult, personal decision, and sometimes a terrible family tragedy, but it's their choice. I don't think I would ever have an abortion. On the other hand, that's my choice, and I'd never take that choice from another person, because government has no business making that kind of medical decision for anybody.
I have a follow-up, 30 seconds. Start with Joe. Would you vote to protect funding for medical service providers who provide reproductive services such as Planned Parenthood?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go down to Fountain County today, and I was down there, I was asked the choice question. Where do you stand on choice? I said it's surreal to me to be sitting here discussing choice as if women in Fountain County actually had one. You must be provided options before you can say you are denied a choice, and when you are not given options, you have no choice, no basic health care. They told me Planned Parenthood was there, but it closed. We can do better. We must do better. Our women require this of us.
It's an interesting thing that part of this election is how do you have this conversation with the single issue voter? And this is what I tell them. Tell you what. How about we support something that says, I'll support a healthcare clinic that services men and women's healthcare services, but we won't reimburse anything associated to an abortion. We'll only reimburse healthcare and basic health services and reproductive services. Well, that's a fine idea. I'd support that. Excellent. I don't have to tell them that that's actually how it works. And that's what Planned Parenthood does. But you know what? They're on board with that when you lay it out for them as what is a practical process. So yes, I would support them.
Thank you. We're going to go on to the VA. We'll start with you, Tobi.
Hey, specialty.
How can Congress strengthen the VA to ensure the best outcomes for veterans?
First thing they can do in the VA is actually staff it. Right now, In the Veterans Administration, there are over 35,000 jobs that are vacant. And here's the game they play. I have a vacancy, it's a slotted position, there's a description for it, they can even advertise for it, but oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any funding to pay the person who fills that position. Congress actually owns the funding. Maybe we can afford to pay for the positions in the VA. One of the arguments for the VA is that Veterans Administration hospitals specifically cater towards veterans because veterans' issues are a little bit different than the average civilian. And maybe it's the veterans specialists that can turn around and serve veterans best. And I agree with them. Veterans' issues are often a little bit different, and they respond to things a little bit differently. First thing we can do is actually fund the hospitals that are there. We can pay for the services we promise them. We can pay the disability which we have authorized for them. The veterans themselves, their disability payments haven't gone up in quite a while. So it's a matter of what can we do for the veterans? Veterans Administration, fully funded is the first thing you need to do. Allow it to be staffed completely.
Joe?
I often think about universal health care and the impact that universal health care might have on all of these specific demographic groups. We speak of veterans often, and God bless them. But I'm working with a 19-year-old boy battling leukemia for the second time. Is he no less worthy of health care? Is a single mother who has 2 daughters battling a brain cancer no less worthy of health care? Can we fix the VA? We can. We can take some of the stresses off. Those everyday ailments, there's no need to tie the VA up. Tobi's right. We could ideally create specialists within the VA and open up community health care to everyone. My brother's father-in-law is a Korean War veteran. He's 70 years old. He battled a colon cancer, and he was being taken to the Veterans Hospital in Indianapolis, wonderful hospital. On occasion, he would have to go to Danville. And the entire time he was going through the chemotherapy and the radiation, he was asking Chris, why can't I just see doctors in Lafayette? And I would like to see veterans, that possibility explored for veterans. They're doing it to some degree today. A friend of mine was in the pilot program. So we can broaden the opportunities to provide access to veterans without necessarily restricting them to the VA. I know a lot of younger veterans would rather see local doctors, but the older ones are somewhat more comfortable with the VA system. But we can offer them choices. It just is a matter of providing health care.
Thank you. We're going to move on to education. We'll start with Tobi, I think.
No, I just did VA.
Okay, then we'll start with Joe. Would you support legislation that would eliminate tuition at 4-year public colleges and universities and restore low interest rates on student loans?
Oh, I have been talking for some time about making college education more affordable. I have been talking about tying the cost of a college loan to the prime rate of the Federal Reserve. Today, that's 1.5%. I would cap it at 2% and provide banks a 0.5 percentage point for carrying the loans. My son graduated from Indiana University in a time frame where he lost both his younger siblings to cancer. We thought we were going to be able to help. We couldn't. He left $60,000 in debt. His girlfriend and pray to God, one day wife, she came up here from Kansas City because Indiana was attractive to her. There was a program there she was involved in. Her debt, $100,000. And some of her loans are for 8, 10, and 12%. This is the same money the taxpayers through the Federal Reserve gave Wall Street at 0% interest, $4.5 trillion. We can make education affordable. I would also like to see education cost made tax deductible, the full ride, write it off on our taxes. We can do that, but to do so, we have to tell Donald Trump he's giving us back his tax breaks.
So education of four-year traditional college to be cost-free. Yes, there's a way to do that. There's actually a fairly extensive financial plan that does not have an adverse impact to our economy to be able to do that. There's several things that need to happen in order to make that work, one of which is to reduce the cost of the loans to students. In order to understand why we're in the situation we're in, we first have to understand a little bit of the history of how it went, how it happened. We pushed our students, 90% of our high schools are pushed into a college program whether or not they should go to college. I have adopted kids who really should not go to college, just saying. All right. But the high school pushed them into that direction. So we have plenty of kids flooding the college system. Basic Economics 101 says you raise the price in order to determine which of these students will have a seat in those colleges. The price is raised, and at the same time, the lending institutions come along and say, hey, I'll help you write a blank check. Now these students go into a college at an exorbitant rate and are paying back their loans at sometimes 25, 27%. Worse than your worst credit card. So they have an exorbitant debt that they can't get out from under. That was pushed there because our schools pushed students into college who probably shouldn't have wanted to go to begin with. Instead, allow trade schools and recognize that those are post-secondary educations for our students as well. Help drive down the cost by driving down the demand. Tie the student loan rate, again, to Prime Plus, like it was when I was going to college. And again, reduce the debt, the payback price for those students. But in the long run, there is an extensive fiscal policy that allows us to be able to afford a four-year college education for students, putting those degrees in higher demand and when you have fewer students, and allowing us to pay for that. It's an extensive one, but it will work.
Thank you. I'm going to go to LGBT rights.
That was mine.
Next. We'll start with Tobi.
Okay.
What actions would you take to protect LGBTQ rights?
What actions would I take to protect LGBTQ plus, etc.?
The whole thing.
The whole thing. People are people. I always wonder a little bit why people are so concerned about what's going on in somebody else's bedroom. People are people. I have friends on every level of that rainbow. Amazing human beings, productive human beings. People deserve consistent rights, regardless of who they love, regardless of who they're married to. What would I do to protect them? Support every single piece of legislation that allows them to be treated equally. And whether that is through a marriage, through hate crimes, supporting of hate crimes legislation nationwide, not just state by state. We'd support it in every aspect to allow it to be a class. You don't get to discriminate against people based on who they love or how they see themselves. So would I support every piece of legislation associated to that? Yeah, because people are people, and I really don't care what's going on in their bedroom.
Thank you. Joe?
I was with the Putnam Pride Initiative not so long ago, and there was a young lady there, high schooler, she was 16 or 17, who has started a pro-LGBTQ group inside her school and in South Putnam. And she said her first year there were 4 or 5 of them. But then the second year there were like 12. And now they're up to 18 or 20. It would be nice if our congressional representative paid a visit to that group, to that school. It would be nice to see our public officials engaged with those very communities we profess to want to protect. Being seen is a means of demonstrating support. Should we support legislation? Absolutely. but by itself it's not enough. We must be seen to be a part of a very vibrant and wonderful community of people. So.
Okay, the 30-second follow-up for both of you. Do you support banning transgender soldiers?
No. I don't support banning transgender soldiers. And every person that I've had a discussion with about it will turn around and say, well, what about when they deploy? All right, let's talk about that, because I have. What about their facilities? I got news for you. You don't care. I got news for you. When you're taking a sponge bath, you don't care. I had relative privacy when I showered. So does every other soldier. The same facilities that work for every soldier would work for every trans soldier as well. When they talk about what are the medication costs, oh my goodness, there might be long-term medication. Yep, they have high blood pressure medication, erectile dysfunction medication. They have a number of medications that soldiers take for life that do not disqualify them from service. So I'm not buying the medication question, and I'm not buying the facilities question. Got any others? Because I don't think anybody cares about what gender the person is or how they identify when they're coming to save their lives.
Joe?
I asked my brother this question. Chris, he and I are very close. Of course, he served in Vietnam. And I know what my response is, and I think it's fairly predictable. But his, you never know. And so I said, hey, Chris, what do you think about transgender GIs? And he said, when you're shooting at somebody who's shooting back at you, you're not really thinking about the character of the person beside you. You just hope they got your back. And that's coming from a 65-year-old Vietnam veteran. It is not my business to determine someone's quality or willingness to serve. We are a nation of patriots. Our LGBTQ community, our transgender community are no less patriotic than you and I. If they're called to serve, we should find a place for them. It's the right thing to do. It's good for the country. It's good for the world. It's good for all of us.
Thank you. And this is our last question, and then we're going to go to audience questions. So we'll start with Joe. Would you propose or support legislation to strengthen and protect the voting rights of low-income and minority people? Why or why not?
I keep finding ways the state of Indiana has managed to suppress voters. I was speaking with a lady here in the audience just a short while before we started regarding the sheriff's race and the prosecutor's race here in Lafayette. We have a closed ballot system in Indiana. So I was talking to Jason Donkowski, and I told him, Jason, for those of you who do not win your races, you should go back and look at how many voters pulled a Democratic ballot, because those are the voters you missed out on. And this is the reality of it. An open ballot would provide voters an opportunity to pick their candidates instead of their parties. You could see the wheels turning. We need an open forum for voting. I would like to see election days made national holidays, people paid to cut off work and go and vote. I despise the idea that we keep people from voting. I think the more ways and avenues that we can identify and promote to make voting far more accessible and a great deal more easy, we should be doing that. It's good for the country.
Thanks.
So strengthen voting rights, particularly among minorities and underprivileged, absolutely. I, at one point, worked for an organization called Election Protection, and its sole purpose was to make sure that everybody who wanted to vote and had a registration to do so could. And while working for them, they would station people paired up with lawyers in low-income areas to say, okay, let's make sure you can vote. And I saw the most amazing voter suppression tactics. Oh, by the way, this little notice was tacked on my door saying my voting time, because of the unexpected turnout, has been moved to Wednesday. Oh, they've knocked on my door and asked me to help get out the vote, and I'm really interested in helping get out the vote. So they have a bus for us. They're going to take us to the other side of the city to help get out the vote. They have a special polling place for us after it regularly closes. Worked with a woman who walked into the voting place. Her name was on the roster, and they refused to allow her to vote because it was Janet Smith Jones, and her ID said Janet S. Jones. We could step in, and a white face, I hate to say it, but a white face standing up for somebody and saying, no, I know the law, and that's wrong, could get them their ballot. That's abhorrent. So would I strengthen those laws? Absolutely. Would I go after stricter penalties for those who actually try to intimidate people at the polls? And yes, that happened too. Yes. There were places where people were registered to vote and they're, mysteriously never got turned in. There are plenty of places where we can put stiffer penalties, stand up for people at the polls, and make sure that every single person who wants to vote does. Because if your ideas can't get past the majority, maybe they're not good ideas.
Thank you both. We're going to go to audience questions, and we're going to try to get through as many as possible because I think those are more important than whatever we have to say. So if you guys want to form a line behind this microphone right in the middle, you'd be able to ask their questions if you have any, and we'll do the 2 minutes for each question.
I can't hear me. Is it on? I'm too tall.
Oh, trust me, it's tricky, dude.
Yeah? I don't know. Okay.
You're good.
Okay. My question is, what do you think of the activism? Oh, Foster. What is your opinions on the activism that's been coming from the survivors of the Parkland shooting?
Who are you asking?
You
I'll
go
take
ahead,
it.
lead.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. One of the things that I find invigorating and marvelous about the activists out of the Parkland shooting is that we want pure spokesmen. We want a spokesman who has never stood next to somebody taking NRA money. We want a spokesman that doesn't have a dark past of, oh, he once was arrested for whatever. Okay? We want pure spokesmen. And the only thing that these kids have behind them is that they've survived a firefight, more than most soldiers have. They're speaking from firsthand experience, which many of their detractors can't. So we love pure spokesmen, and I think that's why they're getting attraction where many of us could not before. Because while we can say it, we're not the purest of spokesmen. They are. I think they are the point of the spear that is likely to make a difference in this discussion.
I myself am thrilled that the millennial generation is standing up and speaking out. We have gone far too long without a unified generation with their own opinions, their own ideas, and a complete, because of the innocence Toby spoke of, a complete lack of fear of the power of the NRA and those who support guns. So I'm thrilled that they're out there, and I certainly support the work they're doing.
Hi. My question is similar to this question. 93 Americans die every day from gun violence. The data shows that in states with automatic background checks on all gun purchases, that number is significantly lower than in states that don't require background checks on all gun purchases. Sorry, my voice is a little weird. Due to the loopholes in the system. What would you do to support? Would you support legislation that closed loopholes and required background checks on all gun purchases?
Take this one first.
Absolutely. I think there are things that can be done. Certainly stronger background checks could be put out there quite easily. I don't see that as an infringement on the Second Amendment. I want to see a domestic abuser law. We know that when domestic abusers are restricted from guns, people's lives are saved. So that is certainly rational. We just watched a shooting take place where an individual was found to be mentally unstable. His guns were given to his father, who gave them back to this person who went out and committed murder. We have a law like that in Indiana. The police can come in if you're mentally unstable. They can take your guns. It takes a court order to get them back. I certainly see no problem with intervention of that kind. I would also say this. We need a comprehensive mental health care program. They are both. These issues are tied. They are umbilically tied. We must be able to identify those prone to violence, and we must have programs in place to treat them. From the earliest ages, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking from grade school right through the entirety of your life.
So I find it... Hello? I've been dead. Okay. Here you go. I find it fascinating and kind of amusing when somebody says we shouldn't be listening to the Parkland students because they don't have any life experience behind them. They don't know what they're talking about. I talked to a gentleman who said that recently, and I said, if your 10-year-old daughter told you not to drive the wrong way on the street, down a one-way road, would you say she doesn't know what she's talking about because she doesn't have her license yet? Or would you agree because it's common sense? And that's what's happening with the Parkland students. The things that they are asking for are well within the bounds of reasonable and within the protections of the Second Amendment. Most of the police, actually every police officer I've talked to agrees. Background checks save lives, but there's a few problems with our background check system. They're not required to be updated. So if you don't have the money to update it or the time, think about the things that you don't have to do. You put them off, especially if they cost you some money. And the same thing's happening with the background database. We don't update it. There's no requirement that it be updated. So legislation does need to be passed that makes that background system mandatory for all sales, mandatory to be updated with criminal activity. The domestic abuser law, which is actually a change in the language associated to the background check. Right now it says if you're convicted of spousal abuse, you go on that background list. It should be changed to domestic abuse because spousal abuse doesn't cover a civil union, a live-in, a common law marriage. Doesn't cover a child. So other things we need to, if you are involuntarily incarcerated for a mental health issue, again, you've gone before a court, your rights have been heard, and if you are incarcerated for violent mental health issue, you go on the list. In each case, you go before a court before your civil liberties are abridged, and that is in line with the Second Amendment.
A month ago, there was a vote in the Senate. 44 senators backed the Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, Chris Murphy bill invoking war powers to end unconstitutional U.S. participation in the catastrophic Saudi war in Yemen. This was the first time there had been a vote in either house on U.S. participation in this war, even though the U.S. has been involved in it for 3 years. It was the first time in 3 years that either house voted up or down on U.S. participation in any war. So I was delighted to hear you both talk about the importance of Article 1 powers of Congress. Congress, not the president, decides when we go to war. But the problem is that this president and previous presidents, the Yemen war started under President Obama, have started these wars without congressional authorization. And so then the question is, what should members of Congress and others do about it, besides saying, oh, I disagree? The War Powers Resolution has a provision that allows any member of Congress to force a debate and vote on to end U.S. participation in unauthorized war. That's what Senator Sanders, Senator Lee, Senator Murphy did. So my question for both of you is, if you are elected to Congress, do you pledge that you will support such efforts, introduce, co-sponsor legislation invoking the War Powers Resolution to force debate and vote on ending unauthorized, unconstitutional U.S. participation in wars in Yemen, Syria, Ukraine, wherever the president is claiming that he or she can launch wars without congressional authorization? Will you help other members of Congress force the issue, call it the question, force votes in the House on ending unconstitutional wars?
In internet technology, in all things, you put out the fire that's immediately in front of you, and you also find the root cause of that problem. In this particular case, the root cause of that problem was the military authorization of force, and that hasn't been revoked. It went in shortly after 9/11, and this country has been at war, quote unquote, ever since. It has been expanded into areas in which it never was supposed to. We started a war on terrorism, and it has gone in ridiculous ways. The resolution for what you're talking about is first to remove that military authorization use of force, and once again return to Congress and the people the ability to go to war, and so that we as a nation speak for that. So yes, in any way that moves us towards that goal, yes, I'd support it.
I think this issue is quite relevant, and it would not surprise me at all if in the next Congress the Democrats held the House and they drove this issue through the legislative process. I would support it only because I do believe that Congress is the voice of the American people, and Congress should be consulted. So yeah, we can do something like that. I'm sure there are proposals out there in Washington, D.C. today. It is finding the right one and supporting it. But absolutely, we can do that.
Well, first, thank you for coming here. And just speak for myself, I'd be very happy to have either of you as my representative in Congress. But you have to win the general first. Why, each of you, why are you more capable than your opponent of being the first Democrat to win the 4th District in years and years and years and years?
That's a great question. I guess it is standard for us to be viewed as opponents. We're not. Tobi's my friend. We have been at this a very long time. And you can see how opponents treat each other when you go out and observe the Republican congressional race, the Republican Senate race. Trust me, we're milquetoast, Tobi and I. We believe a Democrat must be elected. Why am I running? Because I have been so deeply involved in health care for the last number of years. I see this as the single greatest threat to the American people. I understand collapsing public education. I see this as a threat to future generations. That's what's motivated me to run. I'm out here. I'm working hard. Tobi's working hard. You have a decision to make. We're going to accept the decision that's made, and then together we are going to move on and elect a Democrat to the 4th Congressional District.
Okay.
I'll tell you a secret. You're in the 60% minority. Wednesday in November in 2016, most of us woke up to a world we didn't recognize, and we were a little bit horrified. Some of us a lot horrified. But we woke up in a world that we didn't recognize and saw the price of apathy in our voting system. We got what we voted for. Whether you like it or not, we got what we voted for. Today, we are seeing an unprecedented level of activism from every person in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of people walk in a women's march, in the students' march, in Black Lives Matter march, in a dozen different ways. We have seen activism that hasn't been here since the 60s. We are on the cusp of a change. In 2008, Obama won the White House, and 80 organizations were created across the nation to protest the progress that we had made as a nation. Since 2016, on that November morning, 2,000 organizations have formed to stand up and say no. When we go and walk on every single door, and we actually knock at every single door, what we find is that there's about 40% strong Democrats, about 20% that identify themselves as independents, and about 40% that identify themselves as conservatives. But a third of those aren't happy with their own party. A lot of them aren't ready to pick up the banner of a Democrat, but you know what? They tell me that they'll pick up the banner of a veteran because they believe they're patriots as much as we do. So we have the opportunity to go and win this back. It's there, and it's there for our taking. We have the ability to once again flip not just this district, but many, many more across this nation. 34 seats were changed in Congress in 2010, and there were 80 groups that were created to protest. 2,000 groups have been created now. How many seats are we going to flip? How many people can we appeal? Not just the independents, but the conservatives who do not like their party right now, and they have to recognize that they are more in line with Democrats than they ever thought they would be.
Thank you.
So my question is on the topic of education, but early education. So currently there are 20 counties, 20 Indiana counties that are piloting the state-funded pre-K program called On My Way Pre-K. It basically runs like a grant program where each of the families, the children actually apply for the grant, or the families apply for the grant on the children's behalf, and then they receive a full year of funded pre-K prior to entering kindergarten. Do you support this program, and what changes would you like to see to this program?
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about the program to tell you what I'd change. But what I can say is that, yes, we should be funding pre-K. We should be funding kindergarten. We should be funding all of our education right up through college. Education is the key to the development of a nation. Education is the key to moving forward, and early starts are necessary. I'd like to make sure that those kids are fed when they go to school, because there's a significant problem with that in our schools as well. So ask me what needs to change. I'll have to study what's in it to tell you what to change in it, if anything. But would I like to see us fund pre-K? Yeah, because an early start in a good education is a fantastic start for every single person. It is the huge equalizer for us.
I am a big proponent of universal pre-K. Tobi and I are not too awful far apart on our point of view here. She's right. We must have complete and unfettered access to education from our earliest ages right through our older ages. There is always a need and an opportunity to develop your mind and to grow. So, yeah, I support universal pre-K. I'm sorry that it's just a pilot program and not a full-fledged educational program. But you know, we're recovering from Mike Pence, and so we're getting better slowly but surely.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Hi, River.
My question is about education as well. As you know, across the nation, various states are experiencing a teacher walkout. I see right on. I would love to see it happen here in Indiana. We have been told that in Indiana we are facing a teacher shortage. I don't believe it. I do believe that there are teacher shortages in certain areas of our state. We're talking about Gary, we're talking about Indianapolis, and a couple of other places. I guess my bottom line question is, what are we going to do, what are you going to do specifically, to help raise teachers' salaries and create better incentives for better teachers to stay in Indiana?
Well, you know, the states have some say, and the federal government can't just dance in here and dictate to the states. We can do certain things. We can institute debt forgiveness programs for teachers that go into those areas where we are experiencing shortages. I'm a big proponent of debt forgiveness in that respect. Greater tax breaks for those expenditures that our educators take out of their own pocket. Incentivize moving into those underserved areas. We can offer, say, a federal supplement perhaps a shot at higher education beyond just your bachelor's degree. Perhaps if you go into these underserved areas and you serve for 3 to 4 years, we can help you get your master's. There are programs out there. I am absolutely certain that Washington is full of these programs. The question is, which ones will work and who can we get to join with us to push a bill through? I am very hopeful that the House will be predominantly Democrat following November of 2018. And I fully anticipate a number of the individuals will be educators or have field experience in education somewhere. We're going to find those programs. They will come to the surface. I'm excited. I'm excited for Democrats. I'm excited at the opportunity to be your representative in Washington. We can move these issues forward. We simply have to get into a committee and engage in discussion.
A few things we can do right off the bat. Public funds stay in public schools. My mother was a recipient of a loan forgiveness program because she became a teacher and she taught in the outbacks of Alaska. I'm not kidding. Single-room schoolhouse for an entire community, and it was pretty rustic, but it brought to them a teacher. Loan forgiveness programs actually work. Continue those. It helps supply people with skills in areas that are underserved. You can also do that with medical communities as well, by the way. But we should also go a little further. Offer tax breaks for what teachers supply for their students. I wouldn't be adverse to tax breaks for public servants who are teachers as well, for the very aspect of their job. They are serving the public. But the first piece that we can do is mandate that our public funds stay in public schools.
Thank you both for sharing today. Tobi, this is more for you since I don't know as much about your background.
Okay.
Today you guys mentioned trickle-down economics and how that was not, as a failed Reagan policy. You have said in your past that you were a Reagan Republican before. So I guess the two-part question is, when did you change from Reaganism values to progressive values, and why are you running as a Democrat this year? Thank you.
Okay. What I'd said was that I was a Reagan-era Republican. You have to understand I was 14. Heavily influenced by my father's views. And Reagan looked cool. He was also an actor. It's kind of neat. So was I Reagan-era Republican? Yep. When did I have progressive values? Worked on developing my progressive values through my young adulthood. The first person I voted for in a presidential election was Clinton in his second term. And I did it because in his first term, nearly the very first act he did as president was to sign an order that brought me home from Somalia. I was deployed there by Bush. I was brought home by Clinton. So in my family, there's a military tradition, and it's my family's tradition. Everybody serves. Everybody serves in the military. You pay for what you appreciate, and if you appreciate living in this country, you serve. Whether it's the Peace Corps, whether it's the Army, it doesn't matter. And once you have served, you go vote, and you vote in every election. And that's exactly what I did. I know exactly when my first presidential election is, and it was after my first full term of service. So when did I have democratic values? Yeah, I would go right about the time I was in the Army and I saw the effects across the world of where a democracy works and where it doesn't, and what happens when a government collapses, and how did you get there? Did we answer your question back there? Yes? Rockin'. All right. Thank you.
I want to talk about a subject that's difficult but really important, and that is the risk of nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of us are breathing a sigh of relief now because of the negotiations that are going to happen in North Korea and South Korea. But I think we should realize that if we are in a safer position now than we were a couple of months ago, and I'm not sure we are, but if we are, it's not due to any effort on the part of our government. It's due to the diplomatic skills of the leaders of North Korea and South Korea, who seem to have more ability and interest in the world security than our government does. I think it's not just a question of Donald Trump, although obviously he's, a loose cannon, to say the least. But I don't know if everyone realizes that almost half of the Republicans surveyed would support a preemptive strike on North Korea, a totally disastrous move that would not serve any purpose whatsoever. It wouldn't protect our security. Our security is threatened by these policies. And so, we've mentioned a couple of legislative things, the no first use thing, the reauthorization of the war on terror. I'm not sure exactly where that stands, but I think we really have to go beyond this. We have to get somehow control of this situation. And, our system is we only have 3 branches of government, don't we? And we cannot look to the executive branch. Now, we have to severely curtail the military abilities of our government at this time. Another thing I want to mention is that the latest nuclear policy review from the Pentagon, this is a review that gets carried out every year about our situation in terms of nuclear weapons, has proposed a new genre of nuclear weapons. And Donald Trump has alluded to this in some of his statements when he talks about why do we have them if we don't use them and this kind of thing. But this has been enacted in a formal proposal to develop specifically lower yield nuclear weapons that can be used for a variety of situations, including response to non-nuclear attacks. I think the Congress has to get a hold of this. I think I don't have all the bills written out in my head, but I think we can think of them. We have to. Congress has to prohibit that new genre from our nuclear arsenal, and specifically say that nuclear weapons should not be used for tactical purposes, because that can just lead the way to other things. Another thing that
Frank,
we have to look
Frank,
at
I don't
is,
mean to interrupt,
oh,
but
I'm
we are running short on time. So if you have a question for him, it'll be the last one.
Well, might I just make
I think we
Frank?
have till 7:45 or 8 o'clock. But let me get to the questions though. You're right about that.
Yeah, I just
I propose one piece of legislation. My question is, what other kinds of legislation can we, because that's what you're going to be able to do in the Congress. And we can have our opinions about what's good and bad, but what kinds of legislation can we come up with to address the situation?
We are actually looking today, going from a $21 trillion deficit in 2018 to a $38 trillion deficit in a decade. Certainly, everyone out there in Washington has their wish list. I don't know that one would make it on the list itself. I can tell you that the world has been far more damaged by nuclear power plant failures than we have atomic bombs. We only have to look at Japan. We only have to look at Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island here in the United States. Nuclear energy in and of itself is dangerous. We don't need any more bombs. Clearly, we should be working to denuclearize the world, not enhance weapons of mass destruction. What legislation could we possibly offer? I think that comes from party leadership. I think there's going to be a menu. They're going to put those out there. We're all going to sit down as legislators and pick apart that menu of bills, and the legislative agenda that gets set is set from above. It's not set by freshman congressmen from any state in the union. We can find those bills. Certainly we need to work towards denuclearization. We need to work towards disarmament. Korea, with any luck at all, North Korea is moving in that direction. I would hope that it might inspire others. You can look at Iran, Pakistan, India, China, the Soviet Union. They are all right there together, and they are all nuclear powers. This is a problem that we typically do not address. So yeah, we need to work towards denuclearization and the elimination of nuclear bombs. I would not support making new bombs and come home to Indiana and find that our hospitals are closing and our schools are failing. And I would hope that most Democrats of rational mind would feel that way as well.
Quickly, when I was in the Army, I was what they refer to as a nuclear biological chemical officer. Went to special training. I may be the only person here in the room who can actually calculate the yield of a nuclear weapon based on its flash and bang. It's not a skill you want. However, one of the things that we got in that education was exactly what the military's policy is and what the United States' policy with the UN regards to nuclear and chemical weapons. The United States is the only nation to have dropped a nuclear weapon on a civilian population. That's a pretty heavy sin on our heads. We have an obligation and a promise to the world that we would never do it again, and we promised that to the UN. I firmly believe that the President, when he has suggested that we go in and rebuild a new type of nuclear weapon, has gone over our agreements to denuclearize. That is an irresponsible decision that Congress needs to take up and say no. We also need to turn around and take House Resolution 699 seriously to remove the President's ability to use a first strike system. There are things that we can do as congressmen. There are things that we can strongly advocate even as freshman congressmen. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to address that point about the freshman congressman.
Frankly, we don't have time
because
right
I
now.
understand the situation you're in. You know, would be in as a freshman congressman, but I think we need all thoughts, freshman or senior, because we're not getting enough from the Congress that we have now, including the Democrats. So I would encourage you to think of your own and talk to others and have your own. That's who I would like to put in Congress.
No
Someone
one goes
who
to Congress to be a mushroom, Frank.
Huh?
But the point being here is that there are already in play proposals. There are ideas already in play. The idea is to get to Congress. The idea is to hear what these proposals and these ideas are, and then go to work formulating legislation. I can't tell you what they are. Tobi can't tell you what they are. We have an idea, but we don't have a concrete idea, something that we can solidly tell you today we're going to do this.
Yeah. Well, maybe not today. But
Frank, we have to respect their time. We have to respect everybody else's time. You've had your time, so.
Is there anyone else?
We can talk to you later,
Yeah.
Frank. It's okay.
Thank you for your question. Thank you.
We'll talk.
So to finish up, I just want to say thank you both for coming out and spending this evening with us. It's rare in the 4th District for representatives, even potential representatives, to actually come in person and talk to people.
Thank you.
I want to say thanks to everybody in Greater Lafayette Indivisible and everybody in Greater Lafayette Progressives. They put a lot of work into this. It's been great. And I want to remind everybody here, there's early voting going on right now. You can get a list of where all that is on our Facebook page, on our website, and you can learn more information about both groups over at the tables to the right. And if you're not going to early vote, the primary is May 8th, so please go vote, make your voice heard, so we can turn November into something great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.